This morning's scripture reading is from the book of Luke, chapter 21, verses 5 through 19. The author writes, "When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, Jesus said, 'As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down.' They asked him, 'Teacher, when will this be? And what will be the sign that this is about to take place?' And he said, 'Beware that you are not led astray, for many will come in my name and say, I am he, and the time is near. Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end will not follow immediately.' Then he said to them, 'Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to testify. So make up your minds, not prepare for your defense in advance, for I will give you words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents and siblings, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but a hair on your head will not perish. By your endurance, you will gain your souls." Here ends this morning's reading. Thanks be to God for these words of life.
Did any of you watch Game 3 of the World Series 3 weeks ago? Yes? No? Yeah? Did you watch the whole thing? Or did you watch? No, I didn't watch the whole thing either. Rob did, though. Rob watched, and then was at the staff the next day. I was impressed. For those of you who don't pay attention to such things, a normal baseball game is 9 innings. This game went 18. 18 innings. As far as time, it was the second longest postseason game ever, clocking in at 6 hours and 39 minutes. It was crazy. The Dodgers used 10 different pitchers, including future Hall of Fame shoo-in, at least in my opinion, Clayton Kershaw. Now, for a little context, back in September, Kershaw announced that he would retire at the end of this season. So even if you don't know anything about baseball, that does tell you something, right? Is he arguably one of the greatest pitchers of all time? I think so. However, the Kershaw of 2010 to 2015 is not the Kershaw of 2025. Now, to be fair, the Glowiak of 2025 is not the Glowiak of 2010 to 2015 either. I'm not throwing shade. I'm just sort of honestly assessing the situation here. So in Clayton Kershaw, the Dodgers have a pitcher who maybe isn't at his most dangerous physically, but he has quite the pedigree and plenty of postseason experience. So how do you most effectively use someone like that? Well, in Game 3, after a couple close calls in earlier innings, in the top of the 12th, Emmett Sheehan, pitcher for the Dodgers, managed to load the bases with 2 outs. So there are 2 outcomes for the next guy up at the plate, right? Nathan Lukes was his name. The batter, he can either get on base, however he does that, and at least 1 run scores, or he does something resulting in an out and the inning is over and no one scores. And I don't know about you, but this is literally what my friends and I would say when we were playing sandlot baseball as kids, right? You come up to plate, you're like, World Series, bottom of the 9th, or in this case, the top of the 12th, which is actually maybe even more intense. 2 outs, bases loaded, full count. Yes, that's how this batter goes. Now, before Luke steps to the plate, the Dodgers make a pitching substitution and put Kershaw on the mound for literally 1 batter. The series at this point is 1-1. So this is arguably the most important batter of the entire season thus far. And Kershaw worked a full count on Luke's. So barring a foul ball, this whole thing is essentially down to one pitch. And in fact, depending on how the series goes, Kershaw might not ever see the mound again as a professional baseball player, ever. So not only are we talking about this World Series game, but this pitch might also determine how Kershaw's story in professional baseball ends. One pitch. Now, there are two, at least that I can come up with, ways to approach this mentally. The first is fear-based. Fear of walking a run-in, or worse, having to watch a grand slam go over your head. And I feel like when put in situations like this, that's how a lot of us react, right? If you asked, hey, Grant, do you want to be the guy we put in when the stakes literally could not be any higher? I'm not sure I would be jumping at that opportunity with everybody watching. But then there's the other approach, the more aggressive approach. It's the put me in the game coach mentality. It's Jordan pulling up for the jumper as a freshman at North Carolina before everyone knew to put the ball in his hands with seconds to go. It's seizing the moment. It's seizing the opportunity. Now, for those of you who didn't watch that World Series game, I won't torture you anymore. Luke's hits a grounder to the second baseman and was thrown out at first. And that was it. No runs scored. And then in the following inning, the Dodgers put in a different pitcher. They literally put Kershaw on the mound for one batter. And with what I have to imagine was ice water running through his veins, he walked into one of the worst positions you could put a pitcher in. And he delivered. Now, why did I tell you that story this morning? Because in this morning's reading, what I believe to be the most important point is in verse 13. Jesus says, this will give you an opportunity to testify. Let me back up a bit. Our reading this morning opens with a group of people admiring the beauty and implied grandiosity of the temple in Jerusalem. And Jesus essentially says, yeah, sure, this is nice. This is a nice place. But this whole thing is going to collapse. Now, it's important to note the significance of the temple in Jerusalem because it represents more than just a house of worship. It's the center of that society's very existence. It's a symbol for their entire ethnic group. It represents divine, political, and cultural power. It would be kind of like a group of people today admiring the White House, and then someone saying, you know, this is all going to come crumbling down. And maybe that example hits a little close to home, considering the remodeling, both literally and figuratively, going on there these days. But nonetheless, the implication in that statement is not just, oh, the sands of time eventually take everything. The implication is that if the White House collapses, it's not just a building. It's to some extent a symbol of our entire society. The very structure of our daily lives would be inconceivably altered if that happened. Our whole existence changed in fundamental ways hard to imagine. So if someone like Jesus said that today, someone with authority and perhaps a window into the future, the natural follow-up question would be, so like when? When is this going to happen? And is there any way to maybe know ahead of time? Because this sounds like a somewhat terrifying collective moment. And Jesus answers, beware that you are not led astray, for many will come in my name and say, I am he, and the time is near. Do not go after them. So as a preface, he's warning us about false prophets, people who fancy themselves saviors of sorts, people who come in my name, which I interpret to mean weaponizing God and Christianity for personal, political, and economic gain and power. Jesus is saying, be wary of those folks. And then he goes on to say, when you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end will not follow immediately. Then he said to them, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. In the world of biblical studies, this is called apocalyptic literature. It's a genre. We're talking about the end of the world here. It's in the book of Daniel. It's pretty much the entire book of Revelation. And here, Jesus has his own apocalyptic discourse. And what I want to point out about this is that all of the things that Jesus just named for normal, average, everyday people, the people who he is talking to, and for us today, all of this stuff is pretty much wholly out of our control. Sure, we have some individual agency, and as 21st century Americans, we definitely have a more individualized notion of the self than the original audience did, but even so, I am 100% powerless when it comes to preventing earthquakes, dreadful portents, and great signs from heaven. Probably 99% powerless when it comes to having an effect on famines and plagues, and maybe 98% powerless in nation rising against nation and kingdom against kingdom. So for all intents and purposes, Jesus has just named a whole bunch of stuff that we have absolutely no control over. And then he moves to talking about an experience that's much more personal. And yet for many folks, the feeling of powerlessness is quite similar. He says, but before all of that happens, before all of this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. Now, this might tell you more about my childhood and teen years than you need to know, but I knew the name of my family's defense attorney before I turned 16. Growing up in a place like this, many of us either are attorneys, have the means to afford an attorney, or the personal connections to attorneys needed to navigate the legal system pretty well. That would not have been the case for Jesus' original audience. And generally speaking, and not all the time, but a lot of the time, if Jesus is talking about courts or getting hauled in front of officials, that is an experience where the listener is very much at the mercy of those around them, those who hold the power. However, and this is an important distinction in today's reading, this business about getting arrested and being brought before kings and governors all happens before the other stuff that's completely out of our control. And even though we might not have control over getting arrested, this will give you an opportunity to testify, says verse 13. And that is the one thing we do have control over, our testimony. And for those of you with anxiety about public speaking, Jesus is already one step ahead of you. Verse 14, so make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance, for I will give you words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. This reminds me of when God appears to Moses in the burning bush, and Moses is like, I'm probably not your guy. I'm not really good with words. And God's like, oh, I'll give you the words. That's not a valid excuse. God generally doesn't let us get off that easy. And in fact, we don't get off easy at all in this passage, verses 16 and 17. You will be betrayed even by parents and siblings. by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name. God knows that when the rubber meets the road, not having the words is going to be the least of our problems. Having the courage to testify to what is good and right and just, upon threat of losing family and friends, and ultimately one's life, that is the real challenge. That is where our fear and our courage are going to be going head to head. Now, maybe we aren't fully there in this country, but some of these things might be sounding eerily familiar. And I want to be clear, I'm not about to make an argument that what we are experiencing on the national and international stage are early signs of the end times. It's like not the kind of church we are. But what I will argue is that perhaps Jesus' use of the apocalyptic genre here is to instruct us in how to live in times that feel apocalyptic. I'm going to say that again. Perhaps Jesus' use of the apocalyptic genre in today's reading is to instruct us in how to live in times that feel apocalyptic. There are a whole lot of things going on in our world that are mostly or wholly out of our control. So maybe Jesus is saying, you know what? It is what it is. Sometimes life is just going to be a dumpster fire on a macro level, but you can only control what you can control. Sure, it might be the top of the 12th inning. Sure, you might be 37 years old with a slower fastball. Sure, someone else might have loaded the bases for you, but you cannot control any of that. What you can control is your next pitch. That is the opportunity that you are being granted. And with all the noise of everything that's happening around you, Jesus invites us into this singular focus. As Teddy Roosevelt put it, do what you can with what you have where you are. Do you know what Clayton Kershaw was doing the moment the Dodgers ultimately won the World Series in Game 7? He was warming up in the bullpen. He was already warming up when the first batter for the Blue Jays got a double to lead off the inning. And after that, 100% focused on his warm-up, increasing the intensity so that he would be ready to go at a moment's notice. The bullpen coach had to physically walk up to him and tell him that they had won. Kershaw apparently didn't notice his teammates running onto the field, the roar of the crowd, any of that. He was solely focused on his mechanics, on what he could control. He was solely focused on doing what he needed to do to perform at his best if and when the opportunity arose. And I truly believe that is what Jesus is encouraging us to do. Except instead of pitching in the World Series, what Jesus is talking about is something that has actually a lot more riding on it. And it's something that each of us will one day most likely face. Because all of us, if we live long enough, will experience apocalyptic moments in our lives. Could be personal, the loss of a job, the death of a loved one, a divorce, an addiction. You find yourself asking, in light of this event, how will my life continue? Life will never be what it once was, and I cannot even imagine a coherent future. Or it's a collective apocalyptic moment, a pandemic, a war, the unraveling of the fabric of society, the collapse of a government. As Thomas Paine put it, these are the times that try men's souls. And despite all of that pain, despite all the suffering, despite all the fear and anxiety that comes with living in a world beyond our control, despite all that, Jesus teaches us that in that moment lies the moment of opportunity. The moment not to fear, but to pump ice water through our veins. The opportunity to rise to the occasion. The opportunity to testify for what you believe in. The opportunity to stand for right when other folks have left the fight, regardless of the cost. So we must ask ourselves, what opportunities are presenting themselves to us? Where in our lives do we have the opportunity to testify for what we believe in? Is it marching in the street for the love of neighbor? Is it sharing your wealth with businesses and institutions that you believe are actively fighting for justice and hope for a better world and boycotting those that don't? Is it risking betrayal by relatives and friends? For whatever costs we incur, Christ reminds us that not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your souls. Brothers, sisters, siblings in Christ, the opportunities are right outside our door. Let's testify.